what I did come to the floor for was to talk about something I think is important to almost all of us. I was served in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, 3 tours, and back in the late 60s, actually early 70s, and the highlight for us every day was mail call. And we look forward to it every day, every week. And what we get from our families back home and friends, even welcome getting credit card bills and stuff, just to hear some connection to the mainland, and always welcome that. Today we have troops scattered around the world. They still get mail call. It's not as important to them. It's not meaningful to them. They still get packages and that kind of thing, and letters and birthday cards and so forth. But it's not as important to them as it was to us. And we communicate a lot differently now. Folks that are deployed around the world can use Skype, they can use the internet, they can use text messaging and all kinds of ways to communicate with their families, with loved ones and others. Having said that, the Postal Service is still vital to an industry that supports about 8 million jobs in America. It's a $1 trillion industry. And it's especially important in rural parts of our country. We are a nation where most of us live. I think something like 75% of Americans live within about 100 miles of one of our coasts. Think of that. 75% of Americans or so live within 100 miles of our coast. And that means we have a lot of rural areas, the eastern part of our nation, central part of our nation, western part of our nation. And for them, a lot of those folks, they don't have broadband, so they don't have an internet connection. And for them, the mail is especially important. Places like, Alaska, where they even get their food by the mail. And there are places in I understand in Maine, especially up along the Canadian border, where the mail places like enormously important role still does. And so as we look at not just the reorganization of our government, where we look at the Postal Service, there's some people who are interested in privatizing, and the President's talked a bit about privatizing. There's been talk of that for years. Senator Collins, who's on the floor, and I have worked for a number of years to try to make sure that the Postal Service has what it has, what it needs to be successful, and to be vibrant, to be able to generate enough money to meet their obligations, modernize their vehicle fleet, which is about average of 25 years old, to be able to modernize their mail processing centers, which used to handle mostly first-class mail. Now they handle just a lot of packages and parcels. We want to make sure that they have the infrastructure to meet that opportunity today. But today, Mr. President, I'm here to talk about an amendment that's important to the American people, to rural and small towns, to our economy. However, some of our Republican friends will not allow here today, apparently, allow us for a bipartisan amendment to be considered for a vote. The amendment was offered by Senators Heitkamp, Senator Moran, and myself. And the goal of our amendment is pretty simple, and that is to protect American taxpayers from misguided efforts to privatize the Postal Service. Frankly, this amendment should be, I think, an easy vote for all of our colleagues, yet a couple of our Republican colleagues are reluctant to tell their constituents that they support rural and small America losing their postal services. We know that privatizing the Postal Service would be a disaster, maybe not for all American consumers, but for a lot of them, especially in parts of America that I talked about, where there's not so many people, but a lot of land, and people are separated by wide expanses in their states. But privatizing the Postal Service would be a disaster for a number of Americans, especially those in rural parts of America. It would be a devastating blow to the $1 trillion mailing industry, which is growing up around this country, would persist around this country, and which is built on the mailing industry. It would put more than 8 million American jobs in jeopardy, not just jobs in the Postal Service, but jobs across our economy. The number of people who work in the U.S. Postal Service is down by at least a third over the last 10 years, by at least a third. The number of mail processing centers has been cut in half. The number of full-time post offices that are operating 5-6 days a week for, we'll say, from 8 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, the number of those post offices, will say full service, full-time, down by at least a third. And the Postal Service has worked to right-size their infrastructure, their distribution network, to meet the demand for their services today. But You don't have to take my word for it, because for years privatization efforts have been overwhelmingly opposed by stakeholders across the board, by industry, not just by the Postal Service, not just by the people who work at the Postal Service, by industry who uses the Postal Service, by small businesses, not just by big businesses, but small businesses, by unions, and by the American people as a whole. The Trump administration has just put forward a government reorganization plan that included a recommendation to privatize the Postal Service. Since the founding of this country and the creation of the Postal Service, we have maintained that every American should have equal access to the mail, regardless of where they live. If the Postal Service were to be privatized, that will no longer be a promise we can make to Americans who do not live in urban centers. Yet we have companies like UPS and FedEx, but even these companies use the Postal Service to get to most homes in America for the final stretch of delivery. And for a lot of the folks that are being, serviced by UPS, by FedEx, the folks who actually deliver the packages, the parcels, the last mile is the Postal Service. And that's a piece of their business. It is a constructive way for them to work with these other businesses, get the job done almost as partners. If we do privatize the Postal Service, only places where it will be profitable will retain mail delivery. Let me say that again. If we were actually to privatize the Postal Service, the only places where it is profitable will retain postal or mail delivery. If we allow the Postal Service to be privatized, can't imagine we'd be able to maintain Alaska bypass mail, or delivery to Hawaii, or to rural mail routes along the Canadian border in Maine. Because for a private company, the costs would outweigh the profits. And they're in business to make money. We cannot let that happen. Everyone, regardless of location, regardless of age, regardless of race, gender, should have equal access to what is an essential American service. And for any colleague of mine, of ours, who wants to help rural communities, who wants to protect the rights of American consumers, and who wants to bolster our economy, this should be a no-brainer. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.